Some stories ain't meant to be rushed. This is one of them.
She was alone, 22 years old, on 40 acres of dying land in the middle of the Nevada frontier, with nothing but a lame horse, 3 weeks of flour, and a gun she wasn't sure she had the nerve to use. Her father, the most feared lawman in Creston County, had ridden out 4 days ago chasing an outlaw, and she hadn't heard a single word since. But here's what nobody knew. The outlaw her father was hunting, he wasn't in the mountains. He wasn't in the next town over. He was lying face down in her creek bed, bleeding out in the mud, half dead and completely at her mercy. And instead of turning him in for the $200 reward that would have saved everything, she dragged him inside. This is the story of Laura Calloway, of Cole Mercer, of the fire that came for them both, and of the choice, the one single choice that changed everything in this story. Stay with me, because I promise you, by the time this is over, you will not be the same person who pressed play. The Broken Spur Ranch sat on the edge of the Creston Valley, like a man too proud to fall and too tired to stand. It had been her grandfather's land first, carved out of raw Nevada rock in 1851, back when the frontier was still a promise and not yet a punishment. Back when the soil had water in it and the sky had mercy. By the autumn of 1879, the water had been gone 3 summers running, and the mercy had been gone longer than that. But Laura Calloway had grown up in that house. She had learned to walk in its kitchen, and learned to ride in its pasture, and learned to love in its silence, the way only children raised in quiet, hard places learn to love, deeply, without asking for anything back. She was not a soft woman. She had her father's jaw, and her mother's eyes, and a stubbornness that belonged entirely to herself. Her hands were calloused from fence work. Her boots were 2 seasons past needing replacement. She could saddle a horse in the dark and read a weather sky the way a sailor reads the sea. And she had been alone, truly alone, for the first time in her life, for 4 days and 3 nights, and she had not yet broken. But she was close. Her father had left on a Tuesday morning before sunrise. Sheriff Hank Calloway was not a man who made grand exits. He didn't make speeches. He didn't linger. He pressed a kiss to the top of Alara's head, the way he had done since she was 6 years old. Brief, certain, automatic. And he said, "Lock the doors at night. Feed the roan twice. Don't let the Denny boy come around the property while I'm gone." And then he was on his horse. And then he was on the road. And then he was nothing. "No, I love you." "No, I'll be careful." "No, I'm afraid." He was Hank Calloway. Fear wasn't something he admitted to. It was just something he carried quietly in his chest and never set down. The bounty notice was pinned to the inside of the kitchen door, where Alara would see it every morning. Wanted, Cole Mercer. For armed robbery of the First Territorial Bank of Carson City, the Aldous Creed mining payroll stage, and the Western Nevada Railroad strongbox of August 1879. For assault upon a federal officer of the territory, armed, extremely dangerous. Reward, $200 upon capture, dead or alive. $200. She had stared at that number for a long time. $200 was the exact amount of the debt notice nailed to the barn door. The one she'd received 3 weeks ago from the Creston County Land Office, signed at the bottom in a thin, sharp hand by a man named Aldous Creed. She hadn't let herself do the math out loud. It felt too much like something that was meant to happen, and Alara Calloway did not believe in fate. She believed in work and weather and the occasional mercy of strangers. Fate was something men invented to excuse the things they hadn't bothered to prevent. On the first day alone, she mended the section of fence along the south pasture that had been pulling loose since August. On the second day, she inventoried what was left in the root cellar and did not allow herself to feel what she felt when she counted the jars. On the third day, she rode the property line on the lame roan, slowly, and looked at everything her grandfather had built, and everything her father had maintained, and everything that was, quietly, inch by inch, being taken from them by a drought that didn't feel entirely natural, and a debt that didn't feel entirely fair. On the fourth day, she found the man in the creek bed. She almost didn't go down to him. That is the truth. She stood at the lip of the gully with the morning sun still low and red behind her, and she looked at the shape of him in the mud, and her first thought was not to help him. Her first thought was, don't. She was a sheriff's daughter. She had been raised on the vocabulary of danger. She knew what a man looked like when he was running from something. She knew what a man looked like when the thing he was running from had finally caught up. And she knew, with the particular, cold certainty of a woman raised alone in hard country, that going down into that gully was the kind of decision that changed a life. Once you touched something like that, you couldn't untouch it. The wind moved across the creek bed. The man's back rose, fell, rose again, barely. Alara Calloway closed her eyes, took one long breath of the cold Nevada morning, and climbed down. She doesn't know yet who he is, but we're about to find out. He was bigger than she'd expected. That was the first thing she registered as she came down the bank. The sheer size of him, 200 pounds of leather and bone, and what looked like dried blood covering most of his left side. His face was turned sideways in the mud. Dark hair, a jaw that hadn't seen a razor in weeks, a long duster coat that had been expensive once, years ago, in some other life. She put 2 fingers against the side of his neck. Pulse. Weak. Irregular. But there. She grabbed his shoulder and turned him over. Or tried to. He weighed a great deal more than she'd estimated, and for a moment, she was just a young woman in muddy boots, fighting gravity, and dead weight, and the particular stubbornness of a man who had apparently decided to become one with the earth. And then, his face tilted up toward the morning sky, and Alara went completely, absolutely still. She knew that face. She had stared at it for 4 days on the bounty notice pinned inside her kitchen door. Cole Mercer, armed, dangerous, wanted, her father's white whale, her family's $200 salvation, lying in her creek bed, bleeding out, entirely at her mercy. Her hands, she noticed, did not shake. She was very proud of that. It took her 40 minutes to get him up the bank. She didn't have another person to help. She didn't have a cart nearby. She had herself, a length of rope she'd grabbed from the fence post at the top of the gully, and the kind of grim, silent determination that is not admirable in a storybook sort of way, but is simply what happens when a woman raised to survive decides that something needs to be done, and does it. She looped the rope under his arms. She climbed the bank. She pulled. She fell twice. She got up twice. By the time she had him on flat ground and was dragging him the last 50 yards to the barn, her shoulders were burning, and her mouth tasted like iron. And she had made a very private, very sincere promise to herself that she was going to get an explanation for this before anyone died. She just wasn't sure yet whether she was talking about him or herself. She got him inside. Now she has to make the choice. Inside the barn, in the lantern light, she assessed the damage properly. The wound was along his left side. A bullet graze, deep and jagged and mean. The kind made by someone who wasn't trying to miss, but also wasn't a particularly good shot. Someone had already attempted to close it with what looked like a strip of shirt, and a determination that had ultimately failed somewhere around the second day. It had reopened. It was infected. It needed more than she had, but less than a doctor, which was fortunate, because a doctor would mean questions, and questions would mean the law. And the law, in Creston County, meant her father. She got to work. She cleaned it with whiskey from the medicinal bottle her father kept on the top shelf for legitimate injuries only, a category she decided, with some pragmatic creativity, to expand on this occasion. She packed it with boiled cloth and dried yarrow from the kitchen shelf. She stitched it. She had done this before, not on a person, but on animals, and the principle was more similar than people wanted to admit. She covered him in a horse blanket because the nights were cold, and she had not yet decided whether she cared if he lived, and she was not going to let that ambiguity be settled by something as mundane as hypothermia. She propped the shotgun against her hip. She sat down on an overturned crate. She looked at Cole Mercer's face in the shifting lantern light. Slack and still now, it is stripped of whatever hardness the road had put there, looking in sleep like something almost ordinary. And she made herself a promise. When he wakes up, she told herself, I'll decide. Before I go any further, if you are new here, and this story already has you hooked, please consider subscribing. Hit that button right now. Because I tell stories like this every single week. Stories about real human courage, about love in impossible places, about the choices that define us. And I don't want you to miss a single one. Hit subscribe, and let's get back to Alara. He woke on the second night. Not gradually, not peacefully, with a violent full-body lurch toward a gun that wasn't there, his hand finding only air and horse blanket, and the particular, disorienting quiet of a barn instead of whatever nightmare he'd been running through. I took them, Alara said. Her voice came from 6 feet away, steady and calm in the lantern dark, and he went completely still, the way a wild thing goes still when it realizes the trap is already closed, and thrashing will only tighten it. She was sitting on her crate, both hands wrapped around a tin mug of black coffee, the shotgun leaning against her knee. She had not slept. She did not look like someone afraid exactly. She looked like someone who had been afraid and had made a decision about it and was on the other side now. Hey, you can have them back, she continued, when I'm sure you won't use one on me. Cole Mercer stared at her. For a long, long moment, he simply stared, and she let him, and neither of them looked away. His eyes were dark, not in a cruel way, she noted, more like a well. Something had been placed down there, years ago, and it had been going deeper ever since. You know who I am, he said. It wasn't a question. Cole Mercer, she said. 5 counts of armed robbery. 1 count of assault upon a federal officer, wanted in 3 territories. She paused. And my father has been writing for 4 days to put a rope around your neck. Something moved through his expression, something she would have called recognition, except it was heavier than that. More like the look of a man who has been outrunning something his whole life and has just turned a corner and found it waiting, calmly, in a rocking chair. Your father, he said. Sheriff Hank Calloway. The silence that followed was the kind that has weight to it. She heard the wind, the shift of a horse, the pop and whisper of the lantern flame. And then Cole Mercer did something she did not expect. He laughed. Not a joyful sound, not a performance, a short, rough, entirely private sound. The laugh of a man who has been told a joke by the universe and finds it almost funny. "Of course he is," he said. "What does he mean by that? What does he know about her father that she doesn't?" She gave him water. She gave him cornbread. He ate like a man who had forgotten that eating was something he was still allowed to do. Slowly at first, then with a quiet, exhausted urgency that she recognized as something close to grief. The grief of a body that has been running on stubbornness for too long and has finally been permitted to need something. She watched him from across the barn. She noticed things she hadn't planned to notice. The way his hands, large, road-scarred, the color of men who work in the sun, held the tin cup with a careful precision that didn't match the rest of him. The way his jaw worked when he chewed, not with greed, but with concentration, like he was paying attention to every bite out of a gratitude he hadn't quite got around to saying out loud. The scar through his left eyebrow. The broken nose, he healed at a slightly different angle than nature had originally intended. The way he sat, straight-backed even in exhaustion, with the specific posture of a man who had once been taught that slouching was weakness and had kept the lesson long after forgetting who taught it. "Why didn't you leave me in the creek bed?" he asked on the third morning. She was pouring coffee. She didn't turn around. "I needed the water clean." A pause. "That's not why," he said. She brought him his cup and sat down across from him on an upturned bucket and looked him directly in the eyes, the way her father had taught her. No blinking, no dropping gaze. The steady look that said, "I am not afraid of what you see in me." "No," she said. "It's not." She didn't explain further. And he, to his credit, didn't push. He heals. They talk. And somewhere in those quiet barn days, something starts. He healed faster than she had any medical reason to expect. By the fourth day, he was sitting up. By the fifth, he was standing. By the sixth, he was moving around the barn with the slow, deliberate carefulness of a man who had sustained a serious wound and was not stupid enough to pretend otherwise. And in those days, those strange, suspended, lantern-lit days between his waking and his walking, they talked. Not immediately, not easily. At first, it was just the necessary language of care. "Can you move your arm?" And, "The fever's breaking," and, "Hold still, I need to change this bandage." But the barn was quiet, and the days were long. And there is something about tending to a wounded creature, human or otherwise, that dissolves certain walls. You cannot be entirely afraid of something whose pain you have helped carry. She told him about the ranch first. The debt, the drought, the 3 years of bad harvest, the way the land had turned against them like something with a memory and a grudge. She told him about her grandfather building the place with his hands in 1851, and about her mother dying when she was 9, and about how her father had gotten quieter every year since, as if grief was a slow leak he couldn't find the source of. Cole listened. He didn't offer platitudes. He didn't say things will get better or you're strong, you'll be fine. He just listened with the full weight of his attention, and somehow that felt like more. On the 5th evening, she asked him. "The robberies," she said. "Tell me the truth about them." He looked at her for a long moment in the lantern light. "Most men who ask that," he said slowly, "are hoping for a justification." "I'm not most men," she said. Something shifted in his expression. A tiny, involuntary thing. The corner of his mouth barely. Not a smile exactly. More like the ghost of one that had been gone a long time and had not quite forgotten the way home. "No," he said, looking at her. "You're not." And then he told her the truth. And the truth was much worse than she expected. Slow, deliberate, let each word land. "There's a man," Cole said, "named Aldous Creed." Alara said nothing. She knew the name. Everyone in Creston County knew the name. He owns the First Territorial Bank. He owns the Western Nevada Mining Consortium. He owns 4 judges, 2 territorial marshals, and the newspaper that prints whatever story serves him best. Cole paused. He also owns the water rights to every river and aquifer feeding the Creston Valley. Ilara's cup stopped halfway to her lips. "Including the creek behind this property," Cole said. The barn was very quiet. 2 years ago, he continued, his voice going flat and careful, the voice of a man reciting facts because if he lets them become feelings, he won't be able to continue. Creed bought the deed to a piece of land about 30 miles east of here. Small cattle operation. Family by the name of Greer. Good people. Salt of the earth people. 3 generations on that property. He stopped. Looked at his hands. He had them removed by men with guns in January, the middle of January, in a year that had already been cold. Alara set her cup down. "My sister," Cole said, very quietly, "was nursing a 6-week-old baby when they came to the door." The silence that followed was not empty. It was full. Full of something Alara didn't have a word for exactly. A cold, specific, widening fury that she felt not in her chest but somewhere lower, somewhere closer to the ground. The kind of anger that doesn't shout. The kind that simply arrives and takes a seat and refuses to leave. "So, you robbed him," she said. "Every stage, every strongbox, every bank that moved his payroll." Cole's jaw was tight. "Most of it I gave to families he'd pushed off. Kept enough to move, to keep going." He looked up at her. "The federal officer. He was one of Creed's hired guns. He was wearing a badge that Creed bought him. I didn't kill him." A long pause. "I wanted to," Cole said. Alara looked at him. At this man, this wanted, road-worn, quietly burning man, who had done the violent and illegal and necessary thing that everyone else in Creston County had been too afraid, too bought, or too tired to do. "The debt notice on my barn," she said slowly, "has Aldous Creed's name at the bottom." Cole nodded. "I know." Right now, somewhere out in Creston County, Sheriff Hank Calloway is still riding, still hunting, still believing that the thing he's chasing is the danger. He doesn't know what his daughter has found. He doesn't know what she's learned. He doesn't know that the man on the wanted poster and the man who just looked at his daughter like she's the first honest thing he's encountered in years are the same person. If this story is doing something to you, and I genuinely hope it is, please, right now, subscribe. Leave a comment. Tell me what you think is going to happen, because I read every single one. And this community is the reason I keep telling stories like this. Now, back to the ranch. He was ready to leave by the 6th day. She knew it before he said a word. Could see it in the way he stood differently that morning. Straighter, more deliberate, his eyes tracking the tree line through the gaps in the barn boards, instead of resting quietly in the present. The road was calling him back through the walls. The road always called men like Cole Mercer. It was the only relationship they'd had long enough to trust. She helped him resaddle her second horse, the sound one, the bay mare her father called Duchess, without being asked. She worked the cinch with practiced hands and she felt his eyes on her profile as she worked. And she did not acknowledge them, and he did not pretend he wasn't looking. "You could report me," he said. His voice was flat, not defensive, just honest, the way a man talks when he's put down the last of his pretenses. "Get the reward. $200 would settle your deed." "I know." "Then why aren't you?" Not a question, a reckoning. She turned from the horse and looked at him directly. "Because you're not what that poster says you are." She held his gaze. "And because I have lived my entire life in a county that Aldous Creed built. And I have watched my father uphold laws that Creed wrote. And I have spent 22 years being too afraid to say out loud that something is deeply, fundamentally wrong." She swallowed. "You are not afraid to say it. You are not afraid to do something about it. And where I come from in a world like this one, that is not a crime." She paused. "That is the only kind of courage that actually matters." T. Cole stared at her. For a long, suspended moment, he just stared, and something lived in his expression that she hadn't seen there before. Something unguarded, something that the road and the years and the running hadn't quite managed to kill. "Fear is what keeps people alive out here, Miss Calloway," he said quietly. "Maybe," she said, "but it's a very small life." He turned back to the horse. And then he stopped. He stopped. And what he said next changed everything. He didn't turn around when he spoke. "There's a man named Voss, Creed's foreman." His shoulders were tight. His voice was careful in the way a voice gets when the thing it's saying matters, and the person saying it has very little practice, asking anyone for anything. "I've seen him twice since I woke up. On the eastern ridge, before sunrise, both times. He's watching this property." Alara said nothing. But she felt the cold come in. Not the weather cold, the other kind. "I think Creed knows your father is after me," Cole continued. "I think Creed sent Voss here to make sure—" He paused. "To make sure the ranch isn't standing when your father comes back. To make sure there's nothing to come back to. He can't. He has Alara." Cole turned around then. His eyes were serious and quiet and very, very direct. "He's done it to 4 other properties in this valley. 2 of them in the last 6 months. No judge in Creston County will hear the case and live to rule on it. There is no law between you and what he wants to take." He held her gaze. "Except maybe me." The wind moved outside. A horse shifted in its stall. Somewhere very far away, in the direction of the eastern ridge, a crow called once, and then was silent. "My father is out there," Alara said. "He's riding to find you." "I know. If he comes back, and the ranch is gone." "I know, Alara." It was the second time he had used her name. It landed the same way it had the first time. Not like a pleasantry, not like a courtesy, but like something deliberate. Like a man who has spent his life being careful with words, choosing very specifically the one he means. She looked at him. This fugitive, this outlaw, this man her father had ridden 12 days to find. And she understood, with the particular, ground-level clarity of someone who has run out of the luxury of denial, that she trusted him. Not because she was foolish. Not because she was lonely. But because the truth, when you finally hear it, has a sound unlike anything else. It has a weight. It has a texture. And Alara Calloway had been hearing the wrong version of things for so long that the real one, when it arrived, was unmistakable. "What do we do?" she asked. And the "we," when she said it, was not something either of them acknowledged. But it was there, sitting between them in the lantern-lit air, solid and new and entirely serious. "We wait," he said. "And when Voss comes—" He left the rest unfinished. He didn't need to complete it. She understood perfectly. They came at sundown on the 7th day. Alara was in the kitchen when she saw the riders on the ridge, 4 of them, moving down through the scrub at the unhurried pace of men who do not expect to meet resistance. Men who have learned, through long practice, that resistance costs time and explains itself in paperwork, and that the absence of resistance is its own reward. She had the rifle in her hands before she reached the door. Cole was already in the yard. She didn't know how he'd known. Perhaps he hadn't. Perhaps men like him simply developed, over years of hard road, a kind of atmospheric sense. The ability to feel danger the way animals feel the drop in pressure before a storm. He had sent her inside. She had not gone. He turned when he heard her boots on the porch. Hay took in the rifle, took in her face, and said nothing, because there was nothing to say to a woman who had already made her decision. Voss rode in front. He was exactly what she expected. A thick, unhurried, wide-shouldered man with small eyes and a deputy star pinned sideways on his coat, as crooked as everything else in his employer's world. He had the look of a man to whom harm had never been a last resort. It had always been, rather, a preference. The torches were lit before they reached the fence. They hadn't even bothered to wait for dark. "Cole Mercer," Voss said, not loudly. The practiced quiet of a man who has never needed volume because the violence always speaks for itself. "I don't quarrel with the girl. Stand aside, and nobody touches the property." "See, turn your horses around, Voss," Cole said. Voss smiled. It was the smile of a man who finds the concept of opposition genuinely amusing, because he has never, in his entire life, had to take it seriously. "Mr. Creed sends his regards," Voss said. "He says this piece of land has been delinquent on its payments for—" "I know what the land has been delinquent on," Cole said. "I know why, and so do you." He took one step forward. "The water rights your man Creed holds over this valley were stolen. 3 judges confirmed fraudulent deeds between 1874 and 1877. I have the documentation, every ledger, every forged signature, every payoff to every territorial official." He spoke evenly. Like a man reading a sentence he has been composing for 2 years. "I've had them for 18 months. And if anything happens to this property tonight—" "Nothing happens to them after," Voss said, amused. "You're a wanted man, Mercer. Your word isn't—" "It's not my word," Cole said. "It's hers." Voss's man fired first, and everything exploded. The shot came from Voss's left, a sharp crack that kicked up dirt 2 feet from Cole's boot, and sent the horses at the fence line into a shrieking panic. Cole's hand dropped. Rose. The shot he fired was so fast and so precise that later, in the cold daylight, Alara could not fully reconstruct the sequence of events. She remembers the window frame against her shoulder, the rifle stock against her cheek, the hard, cold, with absolute clarity that descended over her like something she had been waiting for without knowing it. The clarity of a person who has decided, down to the floor of herself, that this thing in front of her is wrong and she is not going to let it win. She fired, reloaded, fired again. The next 3 minutes were gunpowder and hoarse screaming and the smell of torch smoke and a fear that she would not feel until later, when it was safe to feel it. In those 3 minutes, she was simply what the moment required, clear-eyed and steady-handed, and as furious as a woman who has had enough. When it was over, two of Voss's men were down. One was already a retreating dust cloud on the ridge. And Voss himself was on his knees in the yard with Cole Mercer's gun pressed to the back of his skull. Alara walked out of the house. Her hands, she noticed, were shaking now. Now that it was over, that seemed about right. Voss looked up at her. He had the eyes of a man who had never genuinely lost before, and losing had remade him into someone new and ugly. Creed will hear about this, Voss said. Good, Cole said. His voice was very quiet. Tell him I'm coming. He didn't pull the trigger. He pistol-whipped Voss twice, efficiently, without ceremony, without cruelty, and left him face down and breathing in the yard dirt. He took the man's horse. He took his deputy star. He held it in his palm for a moment, looking at it, turning it over in the fading light. This small, crooked, or worthless piece of tin that had been used to justify 2 years of systematic theft and intimidation and violence against ordinary people who had done nothing wrong except own land that someone powerful wanted. He pressed it into Alara's hand. Evidence, he said. And then he told her he was leaving. And she said the one thing that stopped him cold. She looked at the star in her palm, then up at him. You're going to Creed, she said. I'm going to Carson City first. Every judge and territorial newspaper that will hear me, with every ledger and deed record I've been carrying for 2 years. His jaw was set. His eyes were on the eastern ridge, on the road, on the horizon, on the long machinery of justice that he was about to try, for the second time in his life, to set in motion. And then, yes, I am going to Creed. Cole, your father is coming back. He said it quickly, and she understood that quickly was the only way he could say it and keep moving. He's a good man who has been serving a rotten system. When he comes back, show him the star. Tell him what Voss said. Tell him what Creed has been doing. Make him understand. He swallowed. Make him understand what I was too, if he'll hear it. Alara stepped forward and grabbed his arm. He stopped. She looked up at him in the dying evening light, at this man who had been brought to her as a stranger, and as a threat, and as a burden she hadn't asked for, and who had, in 7 days, become something she hadn't yet found the word for, but felt the weight of like stone. Come back, she said. Just that. 2 words. Not a question, not a plea, not a hope. A statement, clean and certain, lay down between them like a deed, like a covenant, like the kind of thing a person only says when they are sure they mean it, and absolutely terrified that it won't be enough. Something happened in Cole Mercer's face. Something broke open, just briefly, just for a moment, like a window that has been painted shut for years and years, through storm and drought and every hard season the frontier has to offer. Finally, quietly, admitting light. I've been running so long, he said. His voice was low, almost nothing. I forgot there was anything worth running toward. He pulled her close without ceremony, without strategy, without any of the careful, a self-protective hesitation that had lived in every single thing he'd done since the road swallowed his old life and made him into this one. He kissed her. And it was not the kiss of a man who expects to return. It was the kiss of a man who is choosing, deliberately, consciously, against every instinct that survival has burned into him, to believe that he might. She held the back of his neck with both hands, and she did not let go until he pulled back. And even then, she kept her forehead against his, and neither of them said anything, because the thing between them had moved past language, past the reach of any words the frontier had given them. Then he was in the saddle. Then he was on the road. Then he was the dust and the dusk and the long, cold Nevada dark. Alara stood in the yard of the Broken Spur Ranch, alone again, with a crooked deputy's star in her palm and a fire in her chest, and the particular clarifying loneliness of a woman who has just watched the most important thing in her life ride over the horizon. She looked up at the sky. The first stars were coming out. "Come back," she said again, to no one. To the road. To the dark. To the man who had, maybe, just begun the long work of deserving a place to land. Her father came back 11 days later. He came over the western rise just after noon on a Wednesday, thinner from the trail and quieter than she'd ever seen him, with the particular, folded-in bearing of a man who has ridden a long way to catch something and has come home with only questions. He had not found Cole Mercer. The man he had spent 2 weeks hunting had not been in the mountains, had not been at the next town over, had not, as it turns out, been anywhere that a sheriff of Creston County was positioned to find him, because Cole Mercer had not been hiding. He had been doing something far more dangerous than hiding. He had been telling the truth in every room that would have him. Ilara handed her father coffee. She handed him the deputy star. She sat him down at the kitchen table, the same table where she had eaten 10,000 meals with this quiet, iron-willed, deeply loving man who had never once in his life said the right words at the right time. And she talked. For 2 hours, she talked. About Creed. About Voss. About the water rights and the forged deeds, and the 4 families pushed off their land by men wearing badges Creed had paid for. About the scorch mark in the yard. About a man lying in a creek bed and a choice she had made with her hands and not her head, and had not once regretted. About Cole Mercer. The truth of him. She watched her father's face make the long journey. Disbelief, resistance, the iron pride of a man who does not like to be wrong about anything. And then the slower, harder, each more honest reckoning of a man who has just been shown that the world he believed in was smaller and more crooked than he had allowed himself to see. It took a long time. Good men taking hard truths always do. When she finished, Hank Calloway set down his cup, looked at his daughter across the table, and said, "You saved the ranch." "We did," she said. He nodded once, slowly, in the way of a man filing something away in a place where it would stay. Then he looked at the horizon through the kitchen window, the way he always looked at things that were too large to hold, from a careful distance, with a steady gaze, giving them the respect of his full attention without pretending he could contain them. "This Mercer," he said. "You trust him?" "Yes," she said. A long pause. "Bah, he coming back?" Ilara looked out at the road. The same road that had taken her father away and brought him home. The same road that ran east toward Carson City, and judges and newspapers, and a reckoning that was 20 years overdue. "He said he would," she said. Hank picked up his coffee. Said nothing else. But he did not, that evening, go to his desk and take out a new bounty notice. And that, from Hank Calloway, was its own kind of answer. 3 months passed, and then one morning. The winter came early to the Creston Valley that year. It came in the first week of November with a cold that had opinions about it. Specific, penetrating. The kind of cold that finds the gaps in your coat and sits in them. The creek behind the south pasture, froze 2 inches thick by Thanksgiving, and Alara skated on it the way she had as a child, alone in the frost-white morning, and felt for the first time in a long time that something was different in the texture of the days. Something was being resolved, somewhere out there in the machinery of the world. She could feel it the way you feel weather, not with certainty, but with that deep, atmospheric knowing that has no rational source and is almost always right. Aldous Creed's empire began to come apart in December. She read about it in the Nevada Territorial Dispatch, the Carson City paper that had been Creed's mouthpiece for years, and had now, apparently, found religion in the form of a new editor and 200 pages of documented evidence delivered by a man who had been carrying them across 3 territories for 18 months. The water rights fraud, the forged deed records, the purchase judges, the men in deputies' clothes doing the work of a landlord. All of it. In print. In front of daylight, which is, as it turns out, the one thing a man like Aldous Creed cannot survive. Her father read the paper over breakfast and didn't say a word. But his shoulders, she noticed, sat differently. Like a man putting down a weight he'd been carrying so long, he'd forgotten it was there. The debt notice on the barn came down in January. Not because it was paid. It was voided. Wow. Territorial court order. Whoa. Part of the unwinding of 200 fraudulent property agreements across the Creston Valley. The creek behind the south pasture. The water rights her grandfather had assumed were simply his for 3 decades, and that Creed had quietly claimed in 1874. They came back to the Broken Spur Ranch in a 5-line legal document on a cold Thursday morning that Alara read 4 times, standing in the yard in her coat, before she allowed herself to believe it. She went inside and made herself a cup of coffee. She sat at the kitchen table. She thought about a man in a creek bed, about a lamp burning in a barn, about cornbread and the sound of wind and the particular quality of silence that exists between 2 people who are telling each other the truth and know it. She thought about a kiss that tasted like road and firelight and the exact specific gravity of a choice being made. "Come back," she had said. And she waited. The rider appeared on the eastern ridge on a cold January morning, just after sunrise. Coming down slow through the frost-pale scrub, alone on a horse she didn't recognize, a clean bay, not the mare she'd lent him, a new horse, a horse bought somewhere with money that suggested quietly that things had gone at least partially in the direction of the living. Alara set her coffee mug on the porch railing. She walked to the gate. She did not run. She did not cry. Not yet. That would come later, privately, in the way of women who have spent a long time being the strong one, and have simply learned to schedule their falling apart for a time when it won't cost anyone anything. She stood at the gate with her hands at her sides and the cold air on her face, and let him come to her. The way strong women in hard country have always waited. Not from helplessness, not from patience, but from the certain, grounded, deeply earned dignity of a person who knows exactly what they are worth, and has decided, fully and finally, to stop apologizing for it. Cole Mercer rode through the gate and stepped down from his horse. He was different, somehow. Not softer. The road didn't make men soft, and this road had been harder than most, but settled. Like a thing that has been in motion for a very long time, and has finally found its level. His eyes found hers, and held. "I told you I'd come back," he said. Alara Calloway looked at this man. This battered, stubborn, road-worn, entirely improbable miracle of a man, and felt something settle in her chest, the way the land settles after a long, long rain, deep and sure, and changed, permanently, irrevocably, beautifully, for the better. "You're late," she said, and she smiled. And the gate of the Broken Spur Ranch stood open behind them, not because anyone had forgotten to close it, but because a man had finally stopped running, and a woman had known, from the moment she climbed down into a muddy creek bed on a cold Nevada morning, exactly where he would land. If this story moved you, and I genuinely hope it did, please do one thing for me right now. Hit that subscribe button. This channel exists because of people who believe that a well-told story is one of the most powerful things in the world. That it can make you feel seen, make you feel less alone, remind you that courage has looked like ordinary people in impossible moments since the very beginning of human history. I pour everything I have into every single story I tell here. And if you want more frontier tales, more stories of love and courage and sacrifice, and the kind of quiet heroism that nobody puts in the history books, then subscribe, hit the bell, share this with one person you think needs to hear it today. Ilara waited 11 weeks for Cole Mercer. The least you can do is wait one more second to hit that button. I'll see you in the next story.